2.3 million. 2.3 million men and women are incarcerated today in the United States. And the number is rising. In the last 20 years, it's increased 300%. And there's no end in sight. You've heard about prison overcrowding, health problems, all sorts of issues that go on in prisons. It is high time, past time, for a revamp of our penal system. And I'm happy to say that the state of California is instituting a new plan. It's a three-part plan. It is punishment, restitution, and rehabilitation. 3 parts. Punishment, obvious. You do the crime, you serve the time. But what about the people who are your victims? The people who have been hurt by the things that you have done? Whether it's physical injury, loss of life, damage to property. What about those things? The estimated cost of housing prisoners is about $50 billion. $50 billion is a lot of money. A lot of money. But what do we get from it? Once a man or woman goes into prison, a lot of things happen as a result. If they have families, what happens with the families? The pattern is that the children tend to follow the adults. So if adults are constantly in prison, in and out, then eventually at some point, the children tend to go in and out of prison. We need to stop the madness. And one of the things that has been suggested to help, and that's where we get pay the debt. You've heard that expression? He's paid his debt to society because he spent 23 years in prison. Well, I submit, no, he has not paid his debt. He has been punished for his crime. But what about the people that were hurt by his or her actions? What about them? Because not only have they been hurt, but there's also that $50 billion it costs to keep all these men and women behind bars. So what we're going to be doing today with our panel, who I will introduce in just a moment, is to talk about ways that these men and women who are incarcerated in various institutions, what can they do to give back to the people that they've injured? Not just society, that is part of it, but to individuals. What can they do to really begin to repair some of the damage they have caused? And our panel today, we're going to be throwing out ideas, no matter how weird or how wild they sound. I would encourage creativity. Don't be afraid to express your opinion. I'm going to write it down on my little board up there. We're going to go around a few times until we get as many ideas as we can. Then we'll look at them again and find the ones that seem to make the most sense. And those are the things that we will recommend to the governor of our state to incorporate into the new program. So is that explanation clear to all of our audience? Okay, if there are no questions, then why don't we get started? Our first member of our panel will be James Hicks. Please help me welcome James Hicks. Now, Josephine Hannon. Please welcome Joseph. And then Amit, who's the last name of mine, is a big actor. And finally, Sveta Topolova. All right. Our panelists, our round-robin discussion participants, will each have a moment, 1 minute, and our timer sitting right there will time for us. And I'm going to throw out the question, rephrase the question, and each one will have up to a minute to offer their suggestion, which I'll write down on our handy-dandy little board over there. All right? And we'll probably go around maybe 3 times, and afterwards we'll try to consolidate what we have. Okay? So once again, we are talking about ways that men and women who are behind bars, many of them who remain behind bars, though there are a limited number of people in prison who are actually allowed to leave the prison during certain hours of the day. So it's included. Physical injury, property damage, theft, all these things will be included in our plan to revamp the system. So I'm going to ask you to give us some ideas and ways that these prisoners can really, literally begin to repay making a dent to society. And why don't we start with
I'd love to. First of all, I want to say that, in my opinion, that goes two ways. It is the pain to society, but it is also allowing this person to get an understanding of what he did and re-enter society if he does at a certain point. So my thoughts will be from that perspective. So one thing to do is to maybe reconnect with the victims. And let's say if it was a theft, try to help to restore the property which was damaged or lost through contributions. They might be financial contributions, or there might be just volunteer work or volunteer time, any of this. And
volunteer time, you said?
Volunteer time or money to restore the specific damage if it was property damage.
So I like that point, David, and I think to add on to that, I would also like to understand that what went behind the minds of those people who committed this crime. So as a part of, to repair the damage, they should be allowed or given the time to introspect and tell us that why did they did such a crime and what could have happened differently which would have prevented them from doing that. So trying to figure out the psyche which went behind their mind and how we can prevent this crime, such crimes in the future. So having those people give the first person recount of the reasons why such crimes happen. I think that we should try to understand why such crimes happen by asking those people who did it.
Josephine?
I think if we want to help the people that the prisoners have hurt, we have to understand what the people they hurt want from them. And I think that there needs to be more market research done in terms of what the families would like. And I think to your point, it's also understanding why the person committed it, because they might not even be able to grasp the implications of what they've done based on whatever maybe mental disability that they're facing. So it's also a question to see, can they even currently deal with what they've done and really understand it? And if they can, then it's to also have them be educated on the true implications of what's done, and have them maybe think about and outline all the repercussions of what happened consequently, so they really get it.
Jim?
Yeah, using your original premise that we want to cut off people going to prison, I think one of the attributes ought to be in a program such as this is to educate, maybe take the message out to kids. So I'm talking about an educational kind of format from the standpoint of the criminal. What has happened to this person while they were in prison? Let them know that it's not a place they really want to be. They've hurt people, and how they've hurt people. If we can get that message across, maybe we can kind of short circuit the reasoning for doing crime in the first place.
Something like the Scared Straight program, perhaps?
Something like that, yeah.
Okay. All right. That's our first round. Next, I want to come back to you. Now, keep in mind, there's already a punishment phase being established. So if a judge sentences the prisoner to 25 years, they serve every single day of those 25 years. But during that time, or maybe right after that time, what can that prisoner do, or the ex-prisoner maybe perhaps by this time, what can they do specifically for the victim?
That is a great question, and one thing I was thinking about is that sometimes when you're victimized, it takes a lot of challenge to the victim to restore his own personal condition and, let's say, confidence. Sometimes many victims actually do think that they have contributed to the fact that they were victimized. That is in certain types of crimes. So for instance, if the person has served and he has really achieved a new level, he has improved personally, it probably might help some victims to meet with people who have committed similar crime. So basically, collaboration between victims and people who have committed crimes, in order for the victim to understand that they have no guilt in the crime, that they were not contributing to the crime. Usually, obviously, it is the criminal who did that, but many victims, they cannot meet with the person who victimized them. That would be too harsh, but meeting with another person or collaboration with people, between people to hear just both ends of the spectrum might help victims to restore their the psychological damage caused, which is probably the most difficult to restore, actually.
Okay, I mean,
Yeah, I think carry on along the same lines. I would like to add that, for example, if a victim commits a crime, a certain kind of crime, after his punishment is over, or even during that phase of punishment, there should be some portion of time where he should be volunteering and helping that kind of a society or a volunteer group which is standing for that particular cause, so that we can see, first of all, A, whether his punishment is truly working or not, whether he is benefiting from that punishment, whether he is improving or not. And secondly, that's a nice way to give back to the society in the same area where it caused the damage. So, I mean, that would be the right way to volunteer for the kind of group or the organization which is helping in that same area where your crime lies. And that would be a good.
would an example be perhaps the serial drunk working with MAD?
Exactly, yeah, yeah.
All right. Great. Just
And I think, going back to your point too, I think there's the assumption that whoever has been victimized by this situation would even want that person back into their life. And I think that maybe it's what you've been saying is really, I mean, if a crime was committed to me, I wouldn't really want to deal with that person again, most likely. So I could see there being some potential issues with even that person volunteering with this society, even though they're trying to rehabilitate themselves. That society might have questions in their head about, is this person for real, and can we even trust this person? So I don't know if I don't know what those societies would think about that necessarily, but maybe it's also looking at the skills the person has to bring to the table, because I know after they get out of the prison system, it's going to be very hard for them to find employment again, and seeing like if there's some kind of skills that they have that they could use to better the world, but maybe not necessarily the same group that they hurt. I don't know.
Okay, so they would maybe volunteer with a group that's unrelated.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
Related. Okay, thank you. And Jim.
Another real strong point in my mind is the fact that there might be now two victims. The victim who was a victim of the crime, and after a period of time, this prisoner is in prison for long enough that he or she feels now that they are a victim maybe of society. I think that one of the techniques that's got to be in the equation, in my mind, is the forgiveness factor. I think initially there's probably a lot of revenge kinds of build-up within the victim initially from the standpoint of I've been taken advantage of, so I want to have some justification and some revenge. I want this person to be put away or taken away from society so they won't do that again. But I think that there's also inside of prison, there's got to be some feeling that, gee, I wish I wouldn't have done this, I hurt the person, whatever. Sometimes the mindset is that way. So I guess I'm still on the educational kind of thing, is that this concept of forgiveness needs to be brought about as well through counseling, going out into the community, taking the message out to the community, so again, we don't have this repeat situation.
So this is counseling for the victims and the prisoners?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay. So counseling for everyone. Great.
Re-entry, I think, is one of the biggest challenges in the system today. And I know sometimes we have a negative thoughts about prisoners and criminals, but actually successful re-entry into society would help reduce the amount of crime in our environment. So one thing I would like to think can be a good contribution is, for instance, prisoners who have successfully re-entered society. Let's say 5 years ago, they were released 5 years ago, they re-entered society, they found a way to find jobs, be productive members of society, maybe create a family, to work with people who are re-entering just right now, and help them understand how they were successful, help them become productive members of society. So basically, that way they will reduce the overall crime in our environment.
Okay. So your main ex-cons, basic counseling, ex-cons.
Yes, basically.
Successfully.
Yes.
Okay.
Sure, Sharon, in your original introduction to the topic, you mentioned a huge amount of $50 billion being spent on the prisons. And that was really a big number for me, and I think for most of us here. So what I would like to focus on that particular area and say that we should do two things. First of all, try to do some market research and understand why certain people or certain section of people are committing certain crimes. What is the source of those crimes, and can we prevent it even before the crime is committed? Can we do something in the society, maybe more educational front, maybe having more kind of a counseling for people who need help, maybe having more organizations which can help people who need certain kind of economic help, is maybe not having enough money, maybe they find that the life in prison is much better than the life outside. That's why a lot of people are committing crime and go, I don't know, maybe we need to do more research there. And secondly, for understanding that when the people leave out of prison, are they really improving or are they really becoming worse? For example, is it that a person who was committed for a crime of the murder, is he becoming a serial killer because the conditions within prison are really bad? Understanding that and preventing that kind of thing from happening. So first of all, preventing number of people going inside prison, and secondly, making sure that people, once they come out, they are ready to go into the society.
I think recidivism is somewhere around 50 or 60%, so over half of the prisoners return within 2 to 3 years. Okay, Joseph.
Okay. Well, one thing you were saying before was this patterning. So I think what's really important to be thinking about how we're establishing a system of what happens when somebody makes a mistake and how it affects them the rest of their lives. And right now, it's one of two things. I think it is. It's either they make a mistake and then they're they continue being stuck in that mistake and just having to live their lives around that mistake, whether they're correcting it or not, or it's about moving forward. And I think it's a little bit of both that needs to happen in terms of the system, that they need to be able to, during that time, they need to understand the implications of it and put a plan together so that they could, overcome what they did. But on the same note, I think there also needs to be plans in place of where do they go from here, and that would be the message that they're sending to their family, that there is a way out of this, that it doesn't have to continue, that, just because they made a mistake, they're not forever doomed to continuing going back to prison and repeating it.
So basically hope.
Yeah, hope.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, having known several prisoners on a personal level, I can tell you that some of them go back just because it's the part of the comfort zone. They get all their meals, they get a place to sleep, they don't really have to do too much. There are opportunities for employment inside, but now when it comes time to go outside, and they actually do go outside, there's a hostile society there saying you've done it, you've done the crime, you're not going to be able to make it. So it's very, very tough for them to go out and feel comfortable the fact that they're going to have a job when they get out there. So again, there needs to be some programs so they can understand and feel comfortable about, and businesses have to get involved with this, to give the people an opportunity to show that they can be put back into society with jobs and so forth. It's about money, a lot of it, but again, it's a situation where it's very comfortable. They kind of lose all of their skills and desire to do anything when everything is brought to them, behind the bars.
All right, so we've talked a lot about the prisoners, but what about the victims? Remember, they're still suffering. They've suffered loss. Let me throw one out. We have a lot of men and women in prison. Once they're in prison, their access to things like drugs and alcohol is severely reduced. It's still possible to get those things, but not easy and very expensive. So we have a group of people who are possibly in the best health of their life. They have great medical care, but they do have some. What would you think of long-term prisoners being used to harvest organs? You have 2 kidneys, you only really need 1. Well, this came up, so I'm just going to throw it out there.
Yeah,
what about something like that?
That would be a tough one in this society. I think we'd have a real hard time getting that pulled together just by the ethics of the whole situation. Saying, well, again, that might be a deterrent. Look,
it would make prison more uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. If you commit this crime, you're going to maybe lose something. I don't know. I think it would be a tough sell here to make something like that happen in the country the way it is, and the mindset that we have. But yeah, on one level, you say, yeah, that's a very good situation, and maybe some prisoners would be open to that, to be able to make a contribution like that. But I think it would be a very tough and hard sell. So I don't know if that would make it to your list of considerations that one would really seriously entertain.
It could be voluntary, right?
That's right, yeah.
Josephine, how about your concrete suggestion for how prisoners can begin to make restitution to their victims or to some victims?
It's a really tough call. I mean, I don't feel like it would work just to say I'm sorry or send them some note. I mean, I really think it comes down to, one, having them literally put in the time to show that they've changed through their actions and through their reintegration into society. And I think it's a catch-22, because a lot of times when you're the person in the system that's been victimized, then you might not want them to be reintegrated because you're so hurt, by what they've done. So, I mean, for the victim themselves, although, a lot of times it's, by them being hurt more does not help the victim. It doesn't. It doesn't make them feel better. It doesn't bring back what was their loss. So, I don't know. I think a lot of times the person that did the crime can't help the person they victimized. I think the victim has to help the victim. And I think maybe it's putting more money in the system to help the people they victimized and take it out of the prisons, and then help the people in the prisons get out and get reintegrated and do what Jim was talking about, partner better with the businesses so that they're reintegrated, and you take that $50 billion and you put it into the group that really needs it.
So as I already mentioned before, one concrete way would be to make them volunteer for kind of organizations which are supporting the cause where the crime lies. For example, as you said, the person may be committing a drug abuse is to volunteer for organizations preventing that kind of a thing. That is one thing. Second thing which came to my mind just now as I was thinking is that maybe that's a risky one though, but maybe once the person is out there, finished his punishment period, and once he's out and he gets placed in some kind of a job, which is necessary. I think that's what we need to address first. He needs to get integrated into the society. But once he is integrated, maybe a certain portion of his pay slip or salary goes to either organization or that particular victim to support that kind of thing from happening or that particular cause, or maybe directly to that particular victim whom he victimized, to help him have a better life, I guess. But that's a tough one, because first of all, we need to integrate that person in the society, make sure he has a job, and if he knows that he's going to lose a part of his salary, maybe he thinks, oh, maybe prison is a better place. So we need to also be very careful in preventing that kind of thought going into his mind.
Portion of income, okay?
In summary, what I would like, I think the approach should be is to require prisoners or criminals, after they serve their time, to basically contribute to society. And it might be time or money, but I think time would be the most appropriate. And depending on it will be different depending on the crime, depending on the victim. But let's say you have a requirement that they spend 40 hours a month into the returning to society. It might be by coaching other prisoners. It might be by teaching certain skills they're good to. It might be by financial volunteering, building something and bringing financial contribution back to the victims. So basically it needs to be a multifaceted approach, but basically them contributing time back in different ways that would help the victims, the society, and also them to feel to some extent rehabilitated for what they did, because they would become more productive people.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. Thank you all. Now let's just kind of see if we can summarize what we come up to. We've had suggestions of having them reconnect with the victim, financial contributions, several suggestions to volunteer time. You're all interested in getting to the root of the criminal's problem. Why did they do what they did? Which would probably be very effective with violent crimes. Let's see, what do the victims want? Ask them, right? Let's see, is this prisoner mentally capable of even knowing or realizing what he did? Education was a big issue. Prevention, starting with kids. Something like scared straight. And we have victims to confront the criminal in some sort of session with a counselor. Let's see. Volunteering for victim organizations, but then there was a question about trust factor. Do the organizations actually trust the criminal or ex-criminal, and do the victims really actually want to do it face-to-face? And let's see, what skills do they have? Let's see, perhaps rather than work in the same organization, perhaps a different organization for victims. I'm not sure, forgiveness on both sides, counseling for everyone, concentrate on reentry, research prevention, economic help. Let's see, giving the confidence hope for future. Once more, rehabilitation, suggests that perhaps there really is no way to repay the victims, and then to donate a portion of their income and time as a volunteer. All right, so of all those suggestions, if we were going to make a recommendation to the governor based on what we've discussed, what are probably the three things you think would be the most important things for the new administration to focus on in our prison reform system? I think education seemed to be a big one. Okay, but it's education, is it on both sides? Because you mentioned educate businesses, right, to kind of overcome the stigma of hiring ex-cons. They've done their time, right? And then education for prisoners themselves. All right. So that's really education for all parties. Education for all. All right. So what was the other one?
I think volunteering of time and money, volunteering in any way, contributing back, or maybe part, to bring it as part of adjudication as a requirement, that will be contribution.
Okay, so volunteering either time or money.
And I think time might be more productive for our society, because I think it has more implications overall.
So we would particularly emphasize time. Okay. All right, and what will be the third thing? One focus on.
Education of the group that's behind them, the young minds, so that they don't be involved in crime as adults.
All right, so to summarize, we're going to be looking at recommendations for really expansion of education, which would spread across the spectrum, including businesses, schools, everyone, family, counselors, social workers, so forth. And it would take place inside and outside the prison. Considerable investment in the state. Volunteering, now this would be directly on the prisoners or ex-convicts who would then volunteer time or money. And money's not necessarily a stumbling block because there's some very wealthy people in prison, so we can't overlook that. And then finally, prevention. How do we stop people from going in? That needs to go back into the mix. Prevention from starting, and then prevention from returning. That's right. Okay. Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Those are the three things that we're going to recommend to the new panel. And hopefully based on citizens' response, people who may or have been actually victims of crime, that these recommendations will be taken and programs, policies will be developed based on the input that they received today. So once again, I want to thank you all for coming. Let's give them a big hand. And in the real world, since I won't even ask how many of you have ever been a victim of a crime. No, I have. And it leaves a mark on you. It leaves a smear on your life. It's hard to get past. Very difficult. But you either stay stuck in bitterness and regret, revenge, which doesn't help anyone, or you find ways to move on and hope, pray, do your best to make sure it doesn't happen to someone else. So I hope you've all got something out of the presentation today, and I want to thank you for your time and attention. And I will welcome back the Toastmasters and thank our guests.